Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lone Wolf Project. This is part 2. We're going to be doing retopology and skinning today, I believe. So, retopology, in a nutshell, is taking our really terrible mixed up vertices wolf that we liberally kind of just made and shaped, and turning it into something that has more form and function. So that's what we're going to do today. It's going to be a video that will have a little bit more content in it and won't take as much time. I'm going to time-lapse through a lot of the retopology because it's just doing the same thing over and over again. So I'll give you an idea of what I'm doing, but at the same time, I'll just explain things and let you see what I'm doing, if that makes any sense. So, having said that, let's get started. Alright, so we have our wolf here that we started with last time. Oh, don't move that around. Alright. Looking pretty good. We can take a glance at it just to make sure we didn't miss any parts. Nothing looks weird. I did do a little bit of reshaping, and I'll let you know what that is. I took a bit of clay strip and I moved the shape around the ear to make it more fluid, just so that when we put fur on it, it'll look like it's blended more. And I did define the mane a little bit more. But besides that, it is the wolf that you saw in the last video. So if you still have your wolf, that's great. You're 100% on top of the game. But if we go to our edit mode here and look at our wolf, look at that. The topology is not, it's not terrible, it's very dense. You can see that the lines are running in a pattern, kinda, but where we've shaped and done stuff, it is just kinda slapdash. I wouldn't be, that looked like everything remained quads when we remeshed. But yeah, it's not great, and certainly this is too high of a try count for a game. So we need to take that down. And there are ways that you can lower your poly count in Blender, like decimate geometry, unsubdivide. I wouldn't use that much. But they really won't do you justice for a functional model, and you want to have control over what you're doing. So what we're doing is a process called retopology, and that's basically where we take squares or quads, as we would call them, and put them over the mesh. And we'll do that so that all of the edge loops, it's hard to explain quite what edge loops are in a short sentence, but the idea is that we're going to make all of the edge loops flow so that they connect to themselves. We don't want edge loops that flow into nothing. And I'll show you, if you don't know what I just said, that's okay. I am going to explain everything. I'll show you what's going on. Okay, so to start this off, you can see we have our wolf. It's fairly high poly. It's not as high poly as we could go, but it's fairly high poly. And when I like to start my project, I like to start off around the eye. So I'll do the eye first because it's probably the hardest thing to nail down if you start somewhere else. Some people start on the forehead and work their way down and then do around the eye and then around the mouth, and that's fine. If you know enough about your workflow to manage that, especially on an irregular face like a wolf, then more power to you. If not, which most people I think the answer is not, I would start around the eye because the eye has the hardest edge loops to nail down. I've seen it done wrong so many times. And actually, I will show you what it looks like when it's incorrect. First, though, I'm going to put this wolf back to 0. Oh, nope, sorry. Pressing tab like it's what I want it to do. Back to 0, back to 0, back to 0. All right. So I'm going to do something to set up my retopology, and that is I'm going to put my little 3D cursor right on the forehead. When I click on the forehead, it's going to try to match it to the edge of the mesh. And that's great. So we have our pretty much our Y and our Z set by that. But we want our X to be dead center. So we'll go to the View tab over here. We'll go down to 3D Cursor, Location, and X. You see it's just off of 0. We didn't do too badly in our aim, but we're going to set it to 0. And that's going to put the origin of our new mesh at 0 on the x-axis, which is going to be really important. All right, so in Add and Mesh, we're going to go down to Plane. I'm going to select Plane. And you see it's going to put a little visor on our wolf here. That's fine. All right, and we're going to shrink this down so that it's a kind of manageable size. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of modifiers to it. So we're going to go over here to our little tabs on the side. We're going to click this little wrench. It's going to be our modifiers. And you can see we have an option to add modifier up here. We're going to add 2 modifiers right off the bat. We are going to add a mirror modifier, and we're going to make sure that it's mirroring on the x-axis. We're not going to enable clipping yet. We are going to add another modifier that is over here. It's called the shrink wrap modifier. Just click on that. And the target is going to be our wolf mesh. In my case, it's woof. Perfect. And you'll see that it's already starting to try to shrink wrap to the surface of woof, and this is perfect. It's exactly what we want it to do. It might look a little weird starting out, but that is good. If you're seeing what I'm seeing, you're in good shape. We're going to do a third thing to this before we get into the editing, and that is we're going to turn on snapping up here. You'll see this little magnet. Turn that on so that it's blue, and then on the snapping options, we're going to drag down and we are going to go to face. And that's going to tell it to whatever we're editing is going to snap to the nearest face. So I'll show you how this works. We're going to go into edit mode. And you're going to see 2 little planes. You're going to see one that's shrink wrapped to the surface, and then you're going to see one that's in its actual position in space. So unmodified. You can see it sticking out like that little visor. So I'm just going to, with everything selected as it is, I'm just going to pull it to the side. And you'll notice that the shrink wrap bit disappears, and this is because the mirrored side is actually under the surface right now. It's doing its best to shrink wrap, but we can't really see it because it's at a weird angle, and it doesn't know what we're trying to do. It's just doing its best. So there's a way to fix this so we can work faster and better and with more confidence. Up here you're going to see a little orange box with little, I don't know what to call, little widgets around them. You're going to click Viewport Display, and you'll see a little box that's in front, and this is just going to tell the program that we want this object in front at all times. So now you can see, no matter where we are in the mesh, you can see the mesh we're working on, no problem. So there you go. That's in front now. Okay, so now we want to try and organize. We're finally ready to start retopology. And this is a pretty simple process, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So we're going to organize our eyes. Right now I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it, so do not do as I do right now. I'm going to turn on the Vertices Editing, so I can select the vertices, and I am just going to make a little, you'll see as I drag this, it's going to snap to the surface. So I am going to pull these over to try and retopologize this wolf, and I'm going to turn on clipping because we're doing this wrong. This is not the way you're supposed to be doing it. It's perfect though. Okay, so I'm starting on the bridge of the nose here, and I'm going to make retopology starting on the bridge of the nose. I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be dangerous. I like to use the polybuild tool. It's this little guy over here. Basically what the polybuild tool does is it selects a side or an edge, or sorry, a side or a vertices, and it will create another polygon based off of that. So if I have that little blue line on that line, and I click and I drag, it makes another one. And I can still select my vertices. Okay, so this is me doing it wrong. I'm just going to build around the eye. I'm having a great time. Look at me, Mom. I'm making computer models. Oh, I gotta build around here. So I gotta make sure that this is all cool. This is all great. Like I sound like the teacher trying to be cool. Right, look at that. Look at that. I'm building around the eye. This is great. This is awesome. Making cool model. Oh, look at that. And it's circular around the eye. This is perfect. This is like the perfect model. And just to close it off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to close this whole thing off. Oops. Oh, look at that. Perfectly round around the eye. That's an awesome job, Blair. Good job. You did great. All quads, everything's perfect. But it's not perfect. This is actually the worst topology you could probably ask for. Why is that, you might ask? Well, a lot of retopology depends on the model's ability to subdivide. So, if I cut this edge in half, what you would want is you'd want a line that runs around the eye perfectly. But what we'll get instead is that. And you can see that it's running across the bridge of the nose, around the eye, and then up, and that line will eventually go over the wolf's entire body, all the way down to the tail. And that is a big no-no. It's going to make creases where you don't want creases. It's going to be a nightmare. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our selection back. We're going to just select all of these faces, and we're just going to say, now this is poop. All right. So I'm going to start over, and I'm going to give you a good example of retopology. I'm going to turn off clipping because we don't want that quite yet. And clipping, of course, to reiterate what I had told you guys in the last video, is just where vertices meet on the given axes. They'll merge automatically. So that will be useful eventually here. But for right now, in this explanation, we don't need it yet. And sometimes that can be hazardous if you're trying to put stuff together and you're clipping at the wrong time, and it becomes a problem. Okay. So I am going to go back into vertices selection mode, and I am just going to start building around the eye. So we're just going to use our polybuild tool. We are just going to go around the eye, and like I said, I like starting around the eye. I think it's probably the best place to start. because if you go from the complex circles and you turn it into something that is not very complex, like straight lines, then you're in better shape, I would say. All right, and I'm just going to go around the eye. You'll have to excuse my retopology skills are not the best. All right, and I'm just going around in a circle. And I really want the lines to reach outward. I don't just want to have them go in random directions. I want it to have a kind of flowering circular pattern that keeps it even, so that when it's extruded outward, it's as even as possible. That's fine. Do that. Do that. All right. Now I'm going to select these two because we want to connect these. I'm going to select these two vertices. I do that with Shift right click, Shift right click, or sorry, right click, Shift right click. Then I'm going to press the F, and that is going to draw a line between those two vertices. In order to fill up this whole space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this corner piece, then I'm going to hold Control and right click this corner piece, and that is going to select all of the vertices in between. Then I can fill it, and that'll fill in that whole spot. And there you go, you have a circle around the eye, and when I try to subdivide this using an edge loop cut, you can see that it goes in a perfect circle, and that is absolutely what we want. All right, so going on from there, I can hold the Alt key and click on that, and that is going to select this entire edge loop, which is great. That's another reason why we want our edge loops to be in order. Actually, I'm going to move this right over here. And you can see as I'm dragging these vertices around, the snapping to faces is keeping everything in the right place. So it's keeping it on the surface, and you can see it matches the wolf exactly. Okay, there we go. And it's okay to keep it low poly again. It's really not important what our poly count is right now. It's more important that we make sure that everything is even. All right, so I'm going to select that loop again with Alt and click. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the E to extrude, and that's going to send it flying outward. I'm going to right click just to not move it around anymore. And then I'm going to press the S key to scale that entire loop. And then I'm going to push that outward, just like that. And I think that's about a good size. I want to try to keep my squares pretty even. But I think that's going to cover our bases pretty well. And I'm just going to go around and I am going to make sure that all of these are in the right place. Going outward, again on the surface of the wolf. It's not bad. Actually, I'm going to have this go a little bit more upward. That's fine. All right, and then we're going to do it again. Going to E to extrude. Goes up and out with the scale function. And that is scaled. Now we're in an interesting spot. Because we're meeting in the center, now we will turn on clipping. Because it is appropriate at this point to have these vertices merge. Then again, I'm just going around, and I am making sure that everything is doing its proper thing. Going in the proper direction. Actually, you know what? I'm going to undo clipping. Just its nose is rubbing me the wrong way. think I'm going to do a little bit of a higher poly count. It's hard because I don't want it to be too high poly, because that's going to take longer and it's unnecessary if our topology is correct. But we might be stuck with it. In the long run, it might be better for us. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this again. I'm going to turn on clipping, and I'm going to just give it another layer of polygons going out so that we can really get the bridge of the nose nice and defined. Because if we don't do that, we're going to regret it later. And you can see stuff is starting to shift around. It's hard because maybe sometimes you have too many, you have too few edge loops. Sometimes you have too many. Hard to say. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more edge loop around the eye. I'm going to cheat here. We're going to try and pull this all together so that it looks good, because that's the purpose of all of this. We want to even out our vertices. We want to make sure that they're excellent. Okay, and around the face, this is not bad at all. And you can see how it subtly shifts the shape of your wolf to have things moved around. And this is okay. This is actually a good place to be right now. Okay, so now, as I hope you've observed, we're trying to shift our way toward having a more flat top of the face and a more flat bottom of the face, so that we can start really jumping into being grid-like in our approach to the wolf. And if you know the basics of retopology already and you're jumping into this, just go nuts. Don't listen to what I'm going to say. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vertex and I'm going to select this vertex and everything in between by, again, using Control, hold down Control, and clicking. So that's going to select all of this line. And that's going to be great because it's going to allow me to extrude, and I can start extruding in straight lines. So now I can even this out a bit, and we're now moving the same topology into a kind of straight form so that it's covering the wolf as a grid rather than circles, which is what we want. I want to try to aim my trajectories of lines toward parts that bend and flex. So I might even need another line here to kind of match that. It's not going to matter too much, and I'll show you why later. I'm going to take my poly build tool again, and I'm going to see how there's a corner here. I could probably extrude this vertices and fill that in, vertex and fill that in. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to hover over that little vertex right there, and I am going to hold Control, and you're going to see that it's going to fill in that whole area as I'm hovered there. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to drag down, and that is going to fill that in for me quite nicely. All right, I am going to do the same here. Control, click, bring that down over there. And you'll notice you have some bigger areas. That's fine. If you don't need the extra definition, don't worry about it. Okay, so I am just going to cover the face, and then I'm going to start doing the whole body, and I'm going to do that in a little bit of a time lapse so I don't lose my voice talking. And I hope you can follow along. Please just follow along and do your own thing. If you have any trouble, feel free to pause the video, see what I'm doing. And this is just kind of tedious work, but it's worth it for sure. So I am going to do the face and then we'll go into time lapse. Right, and so again, I'm just using the polybuild tool to go along the nose and let's see, just really kind of general shape. I'm not trying to emulate it perfectly. You can drive yourself crazy emulating shapes like that. And it's just about knowing when to, use a corner, when to not use a corner. And you can see that it doesn't quite make it to the tip of the nose here, so I'm gonna try to pull it out a little bit more so that it's a bit more of a responsible shape. I really just want to cover all of my bases. Maybe I'll put another one there. It doesn't really matter though. So even with me, it's it's very hard to know what you need as far as being minimalistic in this. So I'm just going to pull it down like that. So this is going to be super low poly. We're going to start at the lowest poly count and we are going to work our way up because depending on what game you're developing for, it might be in your budget to do, very, very low poly wolf. And you can see right now our try count is 100 on the face so far. So this is going to be very, very low poly. And that's okay. Low poly wolf. And now you can see that we're starting to kind of level ourselves out and we're moving that way. We have clipping on, so when we meet in the center like that, it should just bring it to the center. Oh, one thing I will say is that when you're shifting these around, when you extrude using the polybuild tool, as long as you're holding down control, it will not snap to a surface. So it'll look like you're properly snapped because everything's in front, but it's not. So I would recommend when you do that, you can see, let me try to do this. So you can see as I pull down and I'm holding control, it's very far away from the surface. And the way to fix this is to just click on it and float it back. I'm actually going to delete that because that is an atrocity. Okay, so now you can see that this has become fairly circular. And I'm going to just go into the time lapse and finish off this wolf in the lowest possible poly count I think I can acceptably call a wolf still. And as I go, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things that I do, especially around the legs, and how I shift the polygons down and around. But basically, I'm going to be taking this main tube that I've created, and I'm going to be going across. And we're only going to be doing this on one side because it's mirrored on the x-axis. So this will all be a long and tedious process, and it'll take you some time to do, but I will meet you on the other side of it. All right, have fun. All right, so we are done with our retopology now, for better or worse. This is our wolf. It's very low poly, as you can see right now, and this is great. Its try count is, let's see, 1,249. Number of faces is 634, which is great. You can see on mine, just the way that things ended up, there are a few tighter quads than there are around here. That's generally not too huge of a problem. You can get some puckering if you are doing subdivision surface modifiers on there. So it can give you some trouble, usually not too much, but it does happen. So if you're making a low poly wolf for a game that requires a budget that's fairly low poly, you can pretty much stop here and skin and do all the rest. You don't have to up the poly count at all. So if I go into object mode and I decide that I want this to be my object, I can shade smooth, and you can see that as far as form, it doesn't do too badly. However, for our purposes, we are going to go up in poly count by a bit. And we're going to do this pretty simply. First, what we're going to do is we're going to skin it while it is nice and low poly. So this is how we're going to do it. Since we did, hopefully, a great job at all of our retopology, skinning should be pretty simple because, oh, it didn't. I lied. I am a bad boy. Okay, so for whatever reason, this is not a single edge loop, but that's fine. We're going to be lazy. Don't tell anybody. I'm going to just select that area, and in skinning, I want to try to make it so that exposed surfaces lay as flat as possible. So I don't want it to pucker around the nose when I put textures on it. I don't want things to be stretched or look weird. So I'm going to select all of these in a single loop around the face like that. And up here, I'm going to go to Edge, and I'm going to say Mark Seam. And I'm going to do this while I'm still in mirrored mode, because once I mark all of these seams in mirror mode, if I apply the mirror modifier so that it becomes one solid mesh, it will automatically mirror all of these over there. And that includes if it has been unwrapped, UV unwrapped, it will do that as well. So I'm going to just going to select this edge loop right there, and that looks good. I'm going to have the nose be one piece so that when it's laid out flat, we see more of the image straight on like that. If you're wondering what my method to my madness is. And I'm going to go again down here, mark seam. So that's a seam. That's telling the computer to cut it there when I unwrap it. And I am going to do a seam straight down the entire model, just like that. And you can see because our retopology worked well, it has no problem going down the entire length of the model. I am, however, going to deselect these ones because I do want the snoot, booped on the snoot, to be fairly straight. I want this to be one piece. I don't want it to cut through the center. So I'm going up here. I'm going down to mark seam, and that will be pretty good. So you can see now that it's going to cut along the seam, and it's going to cut around the nose. So this is going to be one piece. This is going to be one piece. And that's exactly how I want it. Especially important for how we are going to put a texture on there. Okay, so this is an interesting one because I want to keep seams as far away from the naked eye as possible. Sometimes it's unavoidable, down the back, unavoidable. But for the inseam of the leg, what we can do is we can actually take this guy, go all the way down here actually. We can't see this. I think it's because of the shrink wrap. But I'm going to kind of click blindly here and hope it turns out for the best. Yes, it did. Okay, so we are going to get that center of the paw, and we're going to draw a line right here. Now what this is going to do is it's going to unwrap the entire leg. I am not going to let it just lie at that. Hang on, but I am going to mark this seam before I do anything else. Okay, so that's good. So that will go down the center, and that will make sure that this, as a tube, lays flat as a plane. So I'm going to take this, maybe, yeah. I don't think that unwrapping this with the rest of the body is enough, so I'm going to make another seam right there. I think this part of the shoulder will be fine, but I think it's better if this whole paw is separate. We're going to do the same thing over here. Select that, go down. Actually might do it more toward the butt because people are going to be looking less back here. You would hope. No guarantees on that, but you would definitely hope. All right. And again, I am just going to do edge, mark seam, and you can see that that makes a nice little seam all the way down. We're also going to go around the leg. We're also going to go around the leg and do the same thing. Mark seam. All right. And you might think that we're done. We're not done. I'm going to do the same thing to the tail, just to keep everything organized, just to keep everything separate. We're just going to give it a little bit of breathing room. And again, edge, edge, mark. Oh, no, mark sharp. Undo that for sure. Mark sharp and mark seam are very different things. So we're going to mark seam. And that looks pretty darn nice. Now it's going to be a little weird around the ear, but we're not really too worried about the back of the ear because, you know, who cares? And I'm also going to take this eye and mark a seam around it. And you may be wondering, you know, what the hell? This will become obvious soon. But we're doing this for the future. This is not a right now problem. Mark seam. All right, so now we have our stuff pretty much all marked up so that we can unwrap it very easily. No matter what resolution we go to, it will preserve these seams so that if we have a way higher poly count, it's still going to mark the same places. It's still going to cut roughly the same place. So this is good. We do this early on. Fabulous. All right. So our next step is to actually get this wolf higher at a higher poly count. You don't have to. It's at a pretty decent poly count as it is, but we're going to do it anyway. Nope. So I am going to start by actually giving it another modifier because it doesn't have enough already, and that is going to be the Subdivision Surface modifier. So you can see that the resolution goes up right away. And what you want to do is you want to check for puckering where there are more quads, because that can sometimes happen. You can actually see a little bit of puckering right there. Is that going to be detrimental to our model? I don't think so. I'm going to set the number of subdivisions to 1. It's not like it's subdividing one time, but it changes the number of subdivisions you have on there, because I don't want to go crazy with this. I want it to be still usable. So I am going to apply the subdivision surface modifier first, and that's going to show you that it's going to subdivide enough so that it will be willing to stretch out to meet the model. Then I am going to apply the mirror modifier and then the shrink wrap modifier, and that is going to be our correct order of operations to have a nice smooth model that matches what we're going for. And now if we go to our edit mode, you can see that it's still fairly high poly, or it's still fairly low poly, but it looks really good and everything's just really smooth. All the lines are where we want them to be. We have minimal puckering around the eyes. This is fabulous. We can work with this. And the try count for this is 10,000. You know, you can go less, but I like that try count for a nice wolf. Even the one that we had before was, you know, serviceable. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of different things here. This is now a skinned wolf, and you can see that the seams have followed the wolf everywhere. so now we're going to do a little bit of editing for this. Nothing too crazy, but it will matter. So this wolf has no mouth at this point, and its eye sockets are a little shallow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edge select this by holding Alt and clicking. And I'm going to do this on both sides. You might say, Blair, why didn't you do this? Well, it was under its mirror modifier. That makes it very difficult. I am going to pull this back just a little bit, just so I'm kind of matching the resolution. I'm going to extrude by pressing E again and pull it back even more, and extrude by pressing E again and just pulling it back along the y-axis even more. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will give a nice eye socket base. And you'll see that they have these marked seams, which is kind of annoying. But all you have to do is select those, edge, and clear seams. And then there you go. You have that as a nice eye socket. So when we put eyes in there, it's going to be not a mess. We'll do this and this, and do the same thing. What am I doing? Mark seam. Oh, no, unmarked seams. Clear seam. Clear seam. All right. So there you go. Some nice eye sockets. What else do we have to do before we can really get to it? Well, a couple of things. We're going to mess up our beautiful topology just a little bit. But it's going to be okay. I promise. It'll be fine. I am going to take where I think the mouth would be about on the snout, and I am going to, no, doesn't want to go that way. I'm going to go right across there, and I'm going to take that row. I think there's an easier way to do this. I just don't know what it is. I'm going to take that row. I'm going to delete. While I'm doing that, I'm going to turn on this little guy, which is proportional editing. I'm going to go to connected only. So what this will do is it'll give you kind of a area of tolerance with that, which you can adjust with your middle mouse wheel. and it will move other vertices around it, which is great. And I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to pull that way. I'm just going to do the same with this. We're just going to pull everything together. Looks pretty nice. Okay. I should have done the same on the other side. Excuse me. Sometimes you can get away with editing on both sides at the same time with this little symmetry guy on the x-axis. But as you can see, a lot of times it does not recognize the other side as the opposite. So we're not going to depend on that too much. But we are going to move these around. Oh, shoot, I'm supposed to be doing that on the other side. And I know it's painful to watch because we're kind of messing up our stuff, but it's easier this way, trust me. All right. So this now forms an entire edge loop, which is great. We're going to extrude from that, and we're going to actually turn proportional editing off for this. I lied. And we are going to scale on the Z, and we are going to do that again, and scale not so much on the Z anymore. We're going to move it back on the Y just a bit, and maybe take the corners of the mouth and move them back on the Y. Yeah, those are even. Just that we have a little bit of a dip, which is great. And we're going to take this center, we're going to turn proportional editing back on. Take the center too, because there is a cleft in a dog's mouth. And we're going to scale down the proportional editing a bit, but we're going to want to get that nice kind of rounded lip. And being that this is an orifice, we are not going to worry too much about what's going to happen. And this is where it becomes important. This is where it becomes important to have the connected on, because connected is different from regular proportional editing in that it only does stuff that's connected to the actual piece that you're moving. So we are going to make use of this because then it doesn't move the top jaw or the top part of the jaw. We can use it just to move the bottom and things connected to that. We can move this up just a little bit. Oh, that's a little too connected. We can kind of fold it in. I should have done it on both sides. This is the pain of not doing it with symmetry. We can move that up, and we can move this as well so that it doesn't give an underbite, but an overbite, then it still gives him a little bit of space. And you can just form the jaw around that. So yeah, now he is not just a wolf, he is a wolf. She is a wolf. I'll call her she, why not? And we're going to put a little bit more definition in the nose, just to mess with it a little bit. And then we're going to do the eyes. So right now, we have a pretty solid Doge. And we don't really need woof anymore. If you want to have this and put it to the side just for future reference, if you want to use it again, that's a great idea, but we're not going to be working with that anymore. We've got our nice poly woof. And she has a mouth now, which is great. So we're going to do eyes on this, just to give us a nice reference while we're still modeling and sculpting. And how we're going to do that is we're going to add a mesh. We're going to add mesh. We're going to do the UV sphere. And the UV sphere, oh, this is still in front. You can change this from in front mode by going back and clicking that. Okay, so the UV sphere is going to have its topology roughly top to bottom, like this, going around in circles. We're going to make use of that, and we're going to turn it by pressing R and rotating it on the x-axis 90 degrees. That's perfect. So now you can see it kind of looks like an eye with the way that it rotates out. We are going to, let's see, go to edit mode. And we're just going to delete half, just like that. Because the only part that we'll be seeing of the eye is that half. And when we skin this, it will be extra nice to use. All right, so we can also just let it smooth shade because it's going to be so small that that's going to be perfect. Okay, so down here in our little secondary window right now, we're on the timeline that has absolutely no use to us right now. We're going to go into our UV editor, and we're going to start by just putting texture on the eye. So the eye, let's make sure I have the right textures. One of the great things about the interwebs is that I'll actually put a link in the description to this great website. There are people who make textures for eyeballs. They're wonderful. So I'm going to go into my own little texture factory here and see if I can find the right one. Wolves have very kind of orangey eyes. Kind of orangey brown. Alright, so I've located the right eye. So what I'm going to do with this eyeball is I'm going to go into this viewport shading tab. So it's the second one from the far right. It's not a full render, it's just kind of rasterized texture. So you can see the texture, it's not going to render it with path tracing or anything like that. So I'm going to go to my materials. I'm going to make a new material for this eyeball. And I am going to have the, under where it says base color, I'm going to go over to image texture. And this image texture is actually going to be one of my eyes. And the eye is 0098. Okay, so you can see that it looks like a horrifying mess right now. And that's fine. The reason that this is happening is that it's not properly UV unwrapped. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and you can see that when I select all of these vertices, it's showing it as kind of a cube projection. What I'm going to do, since this has been halved, and it now knows that this is the edge of the UV map, I'm going to press U, go to unwrap, and boom, it'll turn it so that you can see down here it matches the layout of how the eye is cut. Now you can see that the eye is a little large right now for its own britches, and that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to go down here to where the actual UV layout is. We're going to press Alt, hold Alt, and click this little loop right here. Now we have proportional editing on, so it's going to move other stuff around it. And what we can do is we can press S to scale, and we can move it out. And it's going to make way for the eye. But we're going to move it down to right there. We can even change the amount that it scales so that we can keep more white in there if we want to, but we're not going to. We're going to have it be kind of bloodshot. And at this point, the iris might look a little bit big, and that's okay too. We can do the same thing. We can scale that, and we don't even have to do proportional editing on that since it's the innermost ring. We can scale it out, and that will close the iris just a bit. We want to keep it kind of open because it's, you know, it's a wolf. Actually, that might not even be big enough. I might have done all of this in vain. So I'm gonna keep it out here just for now, and we can adjust it as we put it in the wolf. But now you see you have a pretty nice eye. And for this, there's not a lot you have to do in terms of, you can get pretty advanced and you can put normal maps and things like that on it. But for our purposes, all we're going to do is go to the roughness, and we're going to take that constant value and turn it all the way down so it's a shiny eye. And that's it. All right, now that we have our one eye, we're going to take this and we're going to scale it down, and we're going to place it in the socket that we made for our wolf. As you can see, it doesn't quite fit the way that we'd want it to. That's okay. We're just going to place it generally where we think it should go and how our dog would be looking. So we don't want it to be too cross-eyed. We just kind of want to put it where we think it should be. And that's fine. So I think right there is about where it's going to be concentrating. If it looks concentrated, I think that's right. So I'm going to go back to my editing without shading. I'm going to select this, and you guessed it, we're going to mess with the mesh. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to make sure that, again, proportional editing is still on. And I am going to up the amount that I'm moving this, and I am just going to flex the eye at its tip around this eyeball. If you mess it up a little bit, that's fine. But we just want to give it a nice eyelid. Doesn't matter too much how you decide to do it, just so that the eye fits in the socket. That's all we're going for. And this is fine. Okay, so now we know that it fits. Oh, actually, I lied. I'm going to undo all of that because I forgot to do it on the other side. I don't know if it'll actually, I don't think it will. Okay. So don't be like me. Don't forget to edit on both sides. And you can look at this side for reference, that's fine. But don't forget to change things on the other side because you want it to be symmetrical. Hard to know which one that is, but maybe it's right. I hope it's right. Not taking my own advice here. And you don't want the eye to be too sunken. Just want it to be nice. That's going to be good. Okay. All right, and we move that back, and that should give us a nice, clean eye socket. So we have our eyes and our wolf, and let's just check to make sure, yeah, doggo's looking good. Has a depth. It kind of looks friendly, a little too friendly actually. Don't like that. So if this is a problem, Try taking a little bit of the smile away. Just by moving it in and moving it forward. That's good. Okay, perfect. Some more serious wolf. All right. So we have this eye now. And you know, now that we look at it in the socket, it does look like it's a little bit too small of an iris and pupil. So what do? We go back and we make adjustments. We make those adjustments by proportionally editing it out like that. You want it to have a little bit of that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we have some intense wolf eyes. So, in order to make this symmetrical, we're just going to Shift D to duplicate. We're going to right click to deselect it. And on the item tab up here, on our x-axis, since we're on the x-axis, we're just going to put a little minus sign next to that, and boom, perfectly symmetrical eyes. And there we go. Now we're going to want to skin this pooch here. Go back into my non-shading editor. I don't even know what it's called. What is this called? Solid? I think it's solid viewport shading. Yeah. Solid. Solid mode. I'm going to go into edit. I'm going to select the whole thing. And now you can see down here in our UV unwrapper, the projection is nuts. It doesn't make any sense. It looks like a square. So what we're going to do, since we did all of these little lines, all of these little seams, we're going to quick unwrap, and that is going to lay out our skin in a nice, orderly fashion. And we can kind of tell what different things are, where the legs are, where the bottom of the paw is. That looks like the eyes on the inside of the eyes. Mainly, it doesn't really matter in this project where things are. When we texture this, it's going to be very artistic. But I will tell you one thing, that this, the way that the mouth is cut, it's not going to be good. So what I am going to do, and actually I'll tell you why it's not going to be good. One, the face is too small, so I'm going to have to up the resolution to get the proper resolution to the probably biggest, most visible part of the dog, wolf. Secondly, you can see how it overlaps here. When we texturize this, this texture and this texture will be the same. So that means that this part of the nose and this part of the nose will have the same texture no matter what. And we don't want that. We don't want any overlapping textures. That is completely against our purposes. But this is very fixable. I think I know why it happened. But we can fix this. So you can see that when we extruded this, it didn't take the seams with it. So what we need to do is we need to select that whole edge. It should do, if I look inside the dog here, it should take it all the way around. We've got a little bit of non-manifold parts there, but we're really not worried about that. We're done with our sculpting and everything. So yeah, it'll take that all the way around, and all we have to do is just remark that seam so that it separates two halves of the face, and it also separates it completely from the nose. And we'll do the same thing, just alt select that, and we are going to just redo that seam, mark seam. And on the inside, you should see, if I can turn it around, that's the butt. All right. Yeah, so now it comes all the way to the edge. So this should, when it unwraps and it cuts it up, it should have this be a half, this be a half, and this nose be totally separate, as well as the bottom jaw be totally separate. And that will be ideal. Also, you'll notice that these will not overlap. We've given it some breathing room because this has a seam. So these eye sockets will have the ability to be textured differently than the rest of the face, which is great. Okay, so let's select everything, and we're going to try that again. We're going to press U, and we're going to press Unwrap. And you can see it's already changed. Where did it put stuff? Okay, so this is half of the face. You can see where the ear is and the eye is. And down here is another half of the face. It unwraps pretty smartly. It's not terribly intelligent, but it does it. So I'm going to just move some of this around. I'm going to select this little guy, which grabs entire pieces when I move it around. I'm going to turn proportional editing off because that's useless to me right now. I'm going to move this out here, and I'm just going to try to rearrange things. Again, it doesn't really matter where they are. It just matters that the proper things get the proper amount of room. So I'm going to try to put the arms over here, and we want to make sure that nothing overlaps. That's going to be important too. Moves doggo face over there. I don't know why I keep calling it doggo. Alright, because I want the face to be fairly high resolution. I want it to have detail. I want it to look good. So I'm going to rotate this, and I'm going to scale it up a bit. Not that much maybe, because I want it to stay on the map, and I also want to make room for my other half of the face. I'm going to select that, rotate it around a bit, scale it up, and hopefully these are at a, no, they're not really at a similar resolution, are they? Let's move this over here, this over here. And you want them to be similar, if not the same size. Because you want them to have even resolution. You don't want one half of the face looking pixelated and the other half looking fabulous. Still not to my liking, but that's fine. And you can kind of use the grid lines to see how you're doing here. That's not bad. Okay, for our purposes, it's going to be fine. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And there you go. We're unwrapped. We've already textured our eyes. And that's where we're going to leave this for now. So, as it stands, we have cut up our model into a nice pattern here that we can texture very easily. Everything looks pretty good. We've already textured our eyes and placed them. So we're in a good kind of place to actually texture our model and make it look complete. So we're very, very close to being done. I'm going to leave it here. We've done our retopology. We have done our UV mapping. And next time we'll paint it. So thanks for joining us in this episode, and I hope that we see you for the next one, where we actually make our wolf look more like a wolf.